Chapter 9, The Seven Tribes of Lehi. The published Book of Mormon narrates Lehi building his family a nation of several tribes with little detail. However, clues discussed in the chapter point to a far richer version of this story, in which Lehi dividing his family into distinct tribes was part of building up an American miniature of the House of Israel. The lineages of Laban, Ishmael, and Zoram. Oh no, it was Ishmael, and it was Zoram who was the... Anyway. The revelation to Lehi identifies his family as a branch from the fruit of the loins of Joseph. That's Jacob 2:25, and also 2 Nephi 3:5. Echoing the biblical Jacob's deathbed blessing on the head of his beloved son, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. That's Genesis 49:22. The core of this new American Israelite commonwealth was to be formed by the intertwining lineages of Lehi, Ishmael, Zoram, and the tribes from which they descended. While the Book of Mormon traces Lehi's lineage to Manasseh, son of Joseph, see Alma 10:3, also 1 Nephi 3:2-4, and chapter 5:14-16. It says nothing of Ishmael's or Zoram's lineages, though it does identify Zoram's master Laban as also being a descendant of Joseph. That's 1 Nephi 5:16. Tribal genealogies in the lost pages. Multiple recollections report that the Book of Mormon's lost text identified Ishmael as belonging to Ephraim. For example, in 1896, Elder Franklin D. Richard recalled hearing Joseph Smith explaining how the Book of Mormon could fulfill Ezekiel's prophecy of the stick of Ephraim, or the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim. That's Ezekiel 37, verses 16 and 19. Anyway, this is the quote. Quote, "Anyway, back in 1843, at Joseph Smith's mansion house, I ventured to walk in and scarcely had more than time to exchange usual civilities, when this brother said, 'Brother Joseph, how is it that we call the Book of Mormon the stick of Joseph in the hands of Ephraim, when the book itself tells us in Alma 10:3 that Lehi was of the lineage of Manasseh? I cannot find in it about the seed of Ephraim dwelling on this land at all.' Joseph replied, 'You will recollect that when Lehi and his family had gone from Jerusalem out into the wilderness, he sent his son Nephi back to the city to get the plates which contained the law of Moses and many prophecies of the prophets, and that he also brought out Ishmael and his family, which were mostly daughters. This Ishmael and his family were of the lineage of Ephraim, and Lehi's son took Ishmael's daughters for wives, and this is how they have grown together. A multitude of nations in the midst of the earth,' Genesis 4:16 and 19, Jacob's prophecy about Ephraim, and the quote continues. If we had those 116 pages of manuscript which Martin Harris got away with, you would know all about it, for Ishmael's ancestry is made very plain therein. The Lord told me not to translate it over again, but to take from Nephi's other plates until I came to the period of time where the other translation was broken off, and then go on with Mormon's abridgment again. That is how it came about that Ishmael's lineage was not given in the Book of Mormon, as well as Lehi's. This explanation from the prophet himself made a deep and abiding impression upon my mind, as I had but recently been reading the passage referred to in the 3rd verse in the 10th chapter of Alma, and was pondering over the same thing with anxious desire to know how this could be, if the ancestry of the race were all of Manasseh. See Franklin D. Richard's Origin of the American Aborigines. Richard's first-hand recollection is supported by earlier statements from 2 other Latter-day Saint apostles, Orson Pratt and Erastus Snow. In a tract he published nearly half a century earlier in England, Pratt reported, quote, "The records of Manasseh in the hand of Ephraim shall gather out the Lord's elect from the 4 winds, and from one end of the earth to the other. The Book of Mormon is recorded of Manasseh. It is now in the hands of Ephraim. The American Indians are partly the children of Manasseh, though many of them are Ephraim, through the two sons of Ishmael. See Orson Pratt, Divine Authenticity of the Book of Mormon. While Pratt failed to identify this information as coming from the lost manuscript, Snow, speaking in 1882, did name it as the source. Quote, "The prophet Joseph Smith informed us that the record of Lehi was contained on the 116 pages that were first translated and subsequently stolen, and of which an abridgment is given us in the first book of Nephi, which is the record of Nephi individually, he himself being of the lineage of Manasseh, but that Ishmael was of the lineage of Ephraim, and that his sons married into Lehi's family, and Lehi's sons married into Ishmael's daughters, thus fulfilling the words upon Ephraim and Manasseh in the 48th chapter of Genesis, verse 16, which says, 'And let my name be on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And these descendants of Manasseh and Ephraim grew together upon this American continent.'" That is from Erastus Snow, May 6, 1882, Journal of Discourses. One last source comes from Charles B. Thompson in 1835, convert who reported Ishmael's Ephraimite lineage in March 1852, the issue of his Zion's Harbinger. Like Richards and Snow, Thompson attributed this information to the Book of Mormon's lost pages. Quote, "We are in the possession of information that Ishmael, whose daughters were wives of Lehi's sons, was the tribe of Ephraim, and that the servant of Laban was of the same tribe. And Ishmael had two sons also. And when Laman and Lemuel, and the sons of Lehi, revolted from Nephi, the whole family of Ishmael revolted with them, except the wives of Nephi and Sam. Hence the Lamanites were principally Ephraimites. It may be proper to state that our information of the origin of this family of Ishmael is derived from the 116 pages of the Book of Mormon that were stolen from the possession in Manchester, New York." See Charles B. Thompson, A Correspondent Witness. While Thompson does not explain how he knows this information was in the lost pages, his earlier writings demonstrate that he knew it prior to, and therefore independent of Joseph Smith's 1843 explanation, overheard by Franklin D. Richards. In 1841, Thompson had published his lengthy titled Evidences in Proof of the Book of Mormon being a divinely inspired record written by the forefathers of the natives whom we call Indians, who are a remnant of the tribe of Joseph. Much of Thompson's book is an argument that Native Americans, as Lamanites, were descendants of Joseph, particularly of Ephraim, and thus heirs to the biblical promises and prophecies regarding that tribe. See Charles Blanchard Thomas, the big giant title that I just read. Since the extant Book of Mormon explicitly identifies Lehi as a member of the tribe of Manasseh, Alma 10:3, Thompson appears to have already understood the Lamanites' other founding progenitor, Ishmael, to be the source of their Ephraimite heritage. Thompson's 1841 information, while not contained in the extant Book of Mormon text, is consistent with it, and agrees with what Joseph Smith would later say was in the Book of Lehi. The Lamanite nation, which early Latter-day Saints straightforwardly equated with all Native Americans, was comprised of three intermixed Lehite tribes, Lamanites, Lemuelites, and Ishmaelites, Doctrine and Covenants 3:18. Laman and Lemuel, founders of the two tribes, both married Ishmael's Ephraimite daughters, and the Ishmaelites' male line of descendants of Ishmael's two sons shared his patrilineal descent from Ephraim. Thus, the resulting Lamanite nation was as genealogically identified with the tribe of Ephraim as with the tribe of Manasseh. Not only does Thompson's earlier account lend weight to the later accounts from Richards, Snow, and Pratt, it also goes beyond them. Thompson additionally reports that the servant of Laban, Zoram, was also of Ephraim, giving him the same tribal origin implied for his master Laban by the account that Laban inherited Joshua's sword, see chapter 7. Together, everyone traveling in the Promised Land with Lehi was either the tribe of Manasseh or that of Ephraim. Did Lehi have daughters who married Ishmael's sons? Erastus Snow's 1882 recollection reported that the sons of Ishmael married into Lehi's family, That's Erastus Snow, May 6, 1882, Journal of Discourses. While Snow does not specify just how this occurred, the most obvious explanation would be that Lehi had unmentioned daughters who married Ishmael's sons. This does not appear to have been the case. This does not appear to have been the case. When Ishmael's group traveled from Jerusalem to Lehi's camp, Nephi refers to the sons of Ishmael and their families, indicating that Ishmael's sons were married prior to joining Lehi's group. 1 Nephi 7, 2-6. A footnote of that says, Nephi mentions sisters in 2 Nephi 5:6, but these do not seem to have been married to Ishmael's sons, unlike the wives of Ishmael's sons who became part of the Lamanite nation and took on them the Lamanite curse. Alma 3:7. These sisters followed Nephi. Furthermore, Nephi lists them, like his younger brothers, without husband or children. That's 2 Nephi 5:6. Since these sisters were not listed by Nephi in his introduction to the first Nephi, it is likely that they, like Jacob and Joseph, were born during the family's sojourn in the wilderness. Okay. Interesting. So even though Nephi had younger sisters, he doesn't mention them getting intermarried with Ishmael. Got it. If these wives, so talking about Ishmael's sons prior to being married, if these wives were daughters of Lehi, then that would mean their father left Jerusalem for its destruction only had them join him when he was told that his own sons would need wives to establish themselves in the promised land. That the Book of Mormon mentions these women only in reference to Ishmael's sons, with Nephi calling them their families, verse 6, and their wives, chapter 18, verse 9, and Mormon calling them merely Ishmaelitish women, Alma 3:7, similarly implies that they were not Lehi's daughters. Okay. So the sons were already pre-married. Nothing in the published Book of Mormon text explicitly rules out Ishmael's sons marrying Lehi's daughters. Nothing supports it either. And the textual evidence weighs against it. If Ishmael's sons somehow married into Lehi's family, discovering how many have to await the identification of new evidence about Book of Mormon's lost narratives. Footnote says, the possibility that Lehi had daughters in addition to those Nephi curiously mentions in 2 Nephi 5:6 is very real. The Genesis narration on Jacob's family implies that he had 21 daughters in addition to his 12 sons. Yet only one of these daughters, Dinah, is mentioned by name in Genesis 46:15. Ha! Wow. Well, he had 4 wives. 21 daughters, 21 plus 12 sons. That's 33 children. What am I balking at? There's down at the rock, there is, Enoch, I think his name is. The main guy, who's son of the founder, who is kind of the head of leading the place. He's got 44 children, so I think he has about 4 wives too. That's still a lot of children per wife. Because, I'm used to the thinking of the idea that, I was actually having this conversation with my wife yesterday about how polygamy actually does increase the birth rate of the group that's practicing it. And the reason why is a few-fold. I know that you studied this, and you said that only so many at maximum could be practicing polygamy. Because if 100% of the women were all married, and as many men were practicing polygamy as possible, that means only 50% of the men could practice it, because each of them would have 2 wives, kind of deal. And that would mean 50% of the men wouldn't have wives. But how it tends to turn out is not that way, that there's only a certain percentage that actually end up having more than one wife. And I know that the birth rate among the women is normally that, like, if in a society, if the average birth rate per monogamous married woman is, like, let's say it's 6 children, because we're talking about pioneer women, right? Let's say it's 6 children. Then if they were part of a plural wife family and a polygamous family, they may have something like 3 or 4 children. So it lowers their individual birth rate. But because it allows more women to be married, because normally if you're in monogamous relationships, you're trying to find the right one that you can hitch your wagon to and stay with the whole time. That means that there are both men and women that don't get married. Whereas in a polygamous society where it's focused on religion, it usually means that any woman that wants to be married can be married. And so it increases the number of women who are married and the number of women who are bearing children, even if it is less than the normal total if they're only in a monogamous marriage. On the other hand, there are obviously families that, do not limit their number of children, as you can see from the example of Enoch's family, where it's like he's got a ton of children. And so if Jacob, who became Israel's family, was 33 among 4 wives, so averaging 11 children among each wife. No, that'd be 33 among 4 wives. So it'd be less than that even. So 7 or 8, which makes sense. So that if you have a wife, a first wife who's really fertile, which would have been, not Rachel, it was been sister Leah? God, I can't remember the names of his wives at this moment. But his first wife, whom he had 7 years with before he got Rachel, he could have already been having kids with her and her handmaid, depending on when she was given in marriage, to be a wife. And same with Rachel and her handmaid. It's like, plus the other thing is that, as my wife personally noted in our conversation yesterday, that when you have a community so focused on children and having children and raising children, you're much more likely to want to continue having children, because you have a whole community of women who are willing to love and help and raise children. For example, when she was down there before 2021 for a couple of years, she said, wow, if I had been down here when I was having and raising children, I probably would have had more if I could have. Just because of how just focused everyone was on families. And so, to me, it's a strong evidence that when Heavenly Father in Doctrine and Covenants says that the plural marriages were to raise up a righteous seed unto him, he meant it. I think he needed to have the birth rate increased of his people. And I think in your studies, if I remember you saying right, you found that, only a certain percentage were practicing it anyway, compared to the rest still just being in the everlasting covenant of marriage. And so I think in the end, it's still, the focus on families becomes extremely sharp when it's put in that regard. And I think that's a very important point, is that it has to also be when the Lord commands it. Because at the same time, if the Lord doesn't command it, I think there's still a lot of problems regardless, just because from a specific, between the traditions and societies that we normally have that focus on monogamy, it's more stable when there is a religious component plus monogamy. The reason it's more stable that way, and I emphasize the religious component, is because right now we're seeing a collapse of the birth rate because of secularism and selfishism, basically, because with men and women focusing on themselves and what am I getting out of the relationship, the birth rate is what? Less than 2 right now. It's like 1.5, 1.6. So we're not replacing ourselves in America. And that's true of most developed nations. And that's why, like, I could not in good conscience only stop at 2 children. I couldn't. And I always wanted to have more, but my wife's body just wasn't going to take it very well. But it makes me wonder if, like she said, if she was in a society that felt like it was more supportive of raising children. There's a lot that I want to mention about her own family and other things like that at this point that complicate things. Putting that aside, I think the world has become extremely selfish, and I think social media has made it so. You've heard my rants about how any woman can go online, and because of different dating apps, instead of having access to maybe 10 men that they would interact with regularly on a daily basis, and they can extend it depending on what social circles they want to run in. For example, if they like go to bars to meet people, or they go to social clubs to meet things. Like for us, religious aspect is going to church to meet other people who share your same values. Well, if you're secular and you don't go to church, where are you going to meet people that share your same values? And so again, going from like 10, 15 regular men that they can access to, they go on social media accounts, and they can get the attention that they want from thousands by lowering their standards. Or if they're specifically going for dating, they can go on dating apps and they will have access to thousands of men. But of those thousands of men, they always want to look for the best. So that leads to this statistic that 80 to 90% of all online interactions and swipes that go towards men are to the top 1% of men. That's extremely unequal. They literally just do not see or do not acknowledge any man who isn't, Chad Thunderbuff, who is, over 6 feet tall, makes 6 figures, all the rest of the stuff that they want. So this means that all these women that are looking for that 1% man will throw themselves at the 1% man in the hopes that he'll, settle down with them. But considering that he's getting 80% of the women always interacting with him, he never has to settle. So it leaves those women with a bitter taste in their mouth that all men are pigs. When no, it's the top 1% that never have to settle that are the pigs they're talking about. The other 80% of the men, 99% of the men on those dating apps are never seen. They're just non-existent. And that then bleeds into their own personal life. So this is why the religious aspect, coupled with traditional family values, is going to be so important. That dating apps are a scourge to the morality of a society in many ways. I mean, I would love to... That's really flamboyant, and obviously there's a lot of exceptions to that. But at the same time, it's like, how do you sit there and reconcile the idea that these women are so focused on so few men, and then the rest don't exist? Or they're willing to get the attention that they want from others by things like OnlyFans or other pornography sites where they just basically get paid to take off their clothes for the attention that they want. Some of them make it well. depending on how well they market themselves. It's just terrific stuff. So, to me, if you have the religious component of staying faithful, which is extremely important, instead of selfish, and you're focusing on families, if you, instead of going for just pure 100% individuals' rights, which tends to hedonism and selfishness, because then it's like, well, why should we ban drugs and other things like that? It's not that bad. But if you change the focus from laws from specifically individuals to families and supporting families, then it's like, yeah, we do want to ban drugs because that does not help families. We do want to limit alcohol because that does not help families. We do want to, it changes it a lot. And unfortunately, it can be, as with any influence by government, whether it's specifically focused on individualism and hedonism, or on families, which could lead to tyrannistic kind of stuff, it can be done either way. It just depends on who's pushing what laws and for what reason. Anyway, I know this is a big aside, but the idea of allowing for there to be a few generations of polygamy to help increase the number of children born in a nation makes sense. But at the same time, if it's not given with the central premise of it being religiously focused, then you also get kind of a twisted, mirrored parallel, like what we have with secularism and the dating apps today. Because if you have polygamy that is based solely on lustful desires, how different is it than going on Tinder, Bumble, Grindr, all those other dating apps? How different is it? The women can just be with whatever man, have paternity fraud, go out and sleep with, well, whoever's walking by that they want, but then be supported by the guy who is the sucker, who married some woman who's strayed and is now raising children that is not his own. It's horrific if it's not focused on being religious, because the idea of committing adultery and messing up people's lineages and families and trust and betrayal, and for both the women and the men, it becomes horrendous, because the women become objectified into sex objects because they throw themselves at the men that are the top 1%, who then don't ever have to settle down, and it means it engenders this distrust of men when it's not all men, it's just those who don't have to settle. And it swirls the toilet bowl. And that's why when you take out religious morals, it just leads to huge downfalls. So, he left off on if Ishmael's sons somehow married into Lehi's family, discovering how it may have to wait to identification of new evidence about the lost narratives. All right, and I read the footnote. Taking the crown from the drunkards of Ephraim. The interplay of Lehi, Ishmael, Nephi, and Laban and their lineages reflects the complex relationship between the two tribes of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Joseph's father, Jacob, passed over the older Manasseh for the birthright. In blessing Manasseh and Ephraim, Jacob crossed his hands, placing his right hand, used to bestow the birthright, on the younger Ephraim. That's Genesis 48:13-20. As noted, while Nephi was from the older but birthright-less Manasseh, Laban inherited Joseph's sword through the younger birthright son Ephraim. Laban also epitomizes the pride of the once dominant tribe of Ephraim, bewailed by Isaiah, quote, "Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which are on the head of the fat valleys of them that are overcome with wine. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, shall be trodden under feet. That's Isaiah chapter 28, verses 1 and 3. Nephi seized Joseph's birthright from the archetypical drunkard of Ephraim for himself and his tribe. That's Genesis 25, verses 29 through 34, and chapter 27, 1 through 41. In supplanting Laban as Joseph's heir, Nephi shifted dominance within the house of Joseph temporarily from Ephraim to Manasseh. Nephi's interplay with Laban here echoes David's with Saul. In supplanting Saul, David removed the leadership over Israel from Saul's tribe, Benjamin, and acquired it for his own tribe, Judah. That's Genesis 49:10 and Samuel 9:11 and Samuel 17:12. By delivering Laban and thus also the sword with which he would be slain into Nephi's hand, God effectively crossed his own hands back, taking Joseph's birthright relics and blessing from Laban and Ephraim and bestowing them on Nephi and thus Manasseh. Much later, the collapse of Nephite nation and the recovery of Joseph's relic by Joseph Smith, identified as an Ephraimite, would complete the circle. There's a footnote here. The Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's revelation in the Bible identify him as a descendant of the biblical Joseph. That's 2 Nephi 3, 4 through 7, Joseph Smith's translation and of Genesis 50, 27, and 33. His later revelations identified Latter-day Saints in general and put him in particular as descendants of Ephraim. Doctrine and Covenants 64:36, chapter 113, 4, chapter 133, 30, and also verses 32 and 34. He is similarly identified as an Ephraimite in blessing given to him by Joseph Smith Sr., December 9, 1834. And Oliver Cowdery, September 22, 1835, see the blessing from Joseph Smith Sr. on the 9th of December, 1834, and the blessing of Oliver Cowdery from 22nd of September, 1835. The relics and the birthright of which they were symbolic in part thus crossed from Manasseh back to Ephraim. This dynamic resembles the Pauline and Book of Mormon theology, in which Israel's apostasy opens the door of salvation to the Gentiles, who in turn bring salvation once again to Israel. The pattern in each case is chiastic and reflects a divine master plan whereby one group's temporary fortunate fall, see Romans 11:11 and also verse 25, or chapter 25, is Romans go to 25? I think it's verse 25. Opens a doorway that ultimately makes salvation free for all men. That's 2 Nephi 26:27 and 3 Nephi 16:4. Footnote says, for close and insightful reading of Paul's theology of Israel and the Gentiles in Romans, and corresponding understandings in the Book of Mormon, see Joseph M. Spencer's For Zion, A Mormon Theology of Hope. The Ephraimite lineage shared by Laban, Zoram, and Ishmael has significant implications. First, it helps account for the Book of Mormon's heavy emphasis on the Lamanites as a Josephite nation. Rather than being exclusively Ephraimite or Manassehite, the admixture of Ephraim and Manasseh, the Lehites could claim both lines of Joseph and be recipients of the blessings pronounced by Jacob on each of those lines. See Genesis chapter 48 and 49. Second, the Ephraimite descendant of Ishmael and Zoram, and also of Laban, would make the golden plates partly. Let me reread that. Second, the Ephraimite descendant of Ishmael and Zoram, and also of Laban, would make the golden plates partly, and the brass plates thoroughly, Ephraimite records. Thus, Joseph Smith's revelatory description of the plates in Moroni's charge as the stick of Ephraim, Doctrine and Covenants 27:5, is illuminated by this genealogy he had previously dictated in the lost manuscript. This description is drawn from a prophecy of Ezekiel, in which the sticks representing the peoples of Judah and Joseph through Ephraim are written on, and then brought together in one hand to represent their joining into a single nation. Although he was one of the exiles taken during the siege of Jerusalem that deposed Jehoiachin and installed Zedekiah, Ezekiel's prophetic ministry did not begin until several years later in Babylon, after Lehi's family had already departed. His prophecies then would not have been included in the brass plates. From his exile, Ezekiel wrote, quote, "The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah, and for the children of Israel his companions, and then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions, and join them one another into one stick, and they shall become one in thine hand. And when the children of thy people shall speak unto thee, saying, Wilt thou not shew us what thou meanest by these? Say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, and his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be in mine hand. And the sticks whereon thou writest shall be in thine hand before their eyes. And say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side, and bring them into their own land, and will make them one nation upon the land, in the land upon the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. See Ezekiel 37:15-22. Although this prophecy could not have been known to Lehi or Nephi, the Book of Mormon has Lehi presenting a parallel prophecy from Joseph of Egypt, found in the brass plates. Quote, The fruit of thy loins shall write, and the fruit of the loins of Judah shall write, and that which shall be written by the fruit of thy loins, and also that which shall be written by the fruit of the loins of Judah, shall grow together into the confounding of false doctrines, and laying down of contentions, and establishing peace among the fruit of thy loins, and bringing them to the knowledge of their fathers in the latter days, and also to the knowledge of my covenants, saith the Lord. That's 2 Nephi 3:12. Latter-day Saint interpreters have naturally seen the implicit connection between Ezekiel's prophecy and that spoken of by Lehi. Joseph Smith's revelation, describing the golden plates as the record of the stick of Ephraim, Doctrine and Covenants 27:5, makes the link explicit. Footnote says the term stick in Joseph's revelation appears to refer to the people of Ephraim rather than the book. The book is referred to as the record of the stick of Ephraim. However, the Book of Mormon's own metaphor for the writings of Joseph and Judah while paralleling Ezekiel's prophecy also differs from it. Joseph's prophecy in 2 Nephi 3 does not speak of dead sticks to be moved about by human hands. For him, the writings of Joseph and Judah are live branches that will organically grow together. 2 Nephi 3:12, and also chapter 29:8, and also verse 13. In this way, they resemble Lehi's nation itself. While it might be identified with Ezekiel's stick of Ephraim or stick of Joseph, this nation grows into a fruitful bough, like one foreseen by the biblical Jacob, see Genesis 49:22, and into a righteous branch unto the house of Israel, as foretold by Joseph in 2 Nephi 3:5. The destiny of that nation, as also foretold in the Book of Mormon, is to grow and intertwine with the other branches of Israel. See 2 Nephi 29:13-14, 3 Nephi 15, verses 17-21, and also 3 Nephi 16:3. 7 tribes of Lehi. Oh, yeah, we'll just finish this off. As his role as a new Moses, Lehi brought together and led members of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh to a Josephite promised land, that he named his 2 sons born during this time, Jacob and Joseph, may point to him looking back to these patriarchs as he considered the implications of establishing a new nation in their own promised land. Thus, in his role as Jacob to the new nation, he founded his own Josephite tribes by demarcating tribal divisions within his own nation, in much the same way Jacob had when he gave deathbed patriarchal blessings to his children and grandchildren. In 1828, Revelation responding to the manuscript loss, the Lord promises that the record would still go to the descendants of the Lehites, dividing them up into 7 distinct tribes, the Nephites and the Jacobites, and the Josephites and the Zoramites, and also the Lamanites and the Lemuelites and the Ishmaelites. That's Doctrine and Covenants 3, 17 through 18. In the earlier surviving copy of this manuscript, the list was copied such that Zoramites and Lemuelites were each replaced with Lamanites, rendering the that was one too far. Triple repetition of the Lamanites. The redactors who published this revelation in the Book of Commandments interpreted this as a mistaken attempt to render the list as given in the paragraph above, and I accept their emendation as reflecting the revelation's intent and original text. Compare Revelation, July 1828, to Doctrine and Covenants 3, and the Book of Commandments in 1833. Dictated soon after the manuscript's loss, this revelation would almost certainly reflect the tribal division observed within it, and subsequent Book of Mormon texts seem to confirm this by enumerating the tribes in the same way and the same order. See Jacob 1:13 and 4th Nephi 1:36 through 37, and Mormon 1:8. The Lehite tribes in the lost manuscript. It's also one of the guys who talks about how Nephi likes to say, well, there's Nephites and Lamanites. I think he was just grouping them into believers and unbelievers, even though there was constantly these 7 tribes to just kind of make it easier. But we all saw how that got turned around anyway, because Nephites screwed up, obviously, several times, and Lamanites became much more aware. Plus, they could actually tell each other apart, physically speaking, because they could sit there and say, well, you're of Lamanite descent, when they were using spies in the Book of Mormon. The Lehite tribes in the lost manuscript. In his own narration in the small plates, Nephi's younger brother Jacob reports Nephi commanding him to limit the subject matter about which he wrote. Quote, Nephi gave me, Jacob, a commandment concerning the small plates, that I should not touch, save it were lightly, concerning the history of this people. For he said that the history of his people should be engraven upon his other plates. And if they were preaching, which was sacred, or revelation, which was great, or prophesying, that I should engraven the heads of them upon these plates, and touch upon them as much as it were possible, for Christ's sake, and for the sake of our people. That's Jacob 1, 2 through 4. There's a project I have going that it's reminding me of. In keeping with this injunction, Jacob declares his intention to elide certain distinctions that might be important to a more detailed account of Lehite's early history, but are not important to his account focused on prophecy, testimony, and doctrine. He thus lumps the various Lehite tribes together into 2 national groupings, or meta-tribes, the Nephites and Lamanites, a precedent followed by the remainder of the small plates. However, Jacob is careful to indicate that this narratorial convention does not express the practices of those whose story he is narrating. The people whose lives during this period were still called Nephites, Jacobites, Josephites, Zoramites, Lamanites, Lemuelites, and Ishmaelites, Jacob 1:13. But, he explains, I, Jacob, shall not hereafter. So he emphasizes, I, Jacob, shall not hereafter distinguish them by these names, but I shall call them Lamanites that seek to destroy the people of Nephi, and those who are friendly to Nephi I shall call Nephites. That Jacob needed to explain this aspect of the narration reveals that it could not be assumed to be a standard convention. The practice was presumably not followed in the contemporaneous history kept in the other plates, of which the lost manuscript was an abridgment. In such an account, which takes the perspective of the kings, issues of lineage and shifting political alliances and conflicts between the individual tribes would have been more important than Jacob's narrative. See 1 Nephi 6, 1 through 3, and also chapter 19, verse 2. Later in the Book of Mormon, these tribal affiliations are mentioned. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. Later in the Book of Mormon, these tribal affiliations are mentioned only occasionally. Thus, any information we can uncover on the origin, meaning and enduring significance of these tribal distinctions will give us a window into this lost history. The natural beginning place for such an inquiry would be Lehi's blessing on his posterity, by which he divided them into tribes, constructing the seven-branched nation. According to John W. Welch, the roots of the Lehite tribal structure are in Lehi's deathbed blessings to his posterity. Quote, and this is from John W. Welch's Lehi's Last Will and Testament, a legal approach. Oh, that's pretty cool. Quote, one of the most enduring legacies of Lehi's Last Will and Testament appears to be the organization of his descendants into tribes, just as the ancient patriarch Jacob left the house of Israel with a family structure composed of 12 tribes. Lehi addressed his posterity in 7 groups. Lehi spoke 1 to Zoram, and in 2 Nephi 1, 30 through 32. 2, Jacob, that's 2 Nephi 2 and 3. To Joseph in 2 Nephi 3 and 4. To the children of Laman in 2 Nephi 4, 3 through 7. 5, to the children of Lemuel in 2 Nephi 4, 8 through 9. And 6, to the sons of Ishmael in 2 Nephi 4 through 10. And 7, to Sam, together with Nephi in 2 Nephi 4:11. The 7 groups recognizable here are exactly the same as the 7 tribes mentioned 3 other times in the Book of Mormon, each time in the rigid order of Nephites, Jacobites, Josephites, Zoramites, Lamanites, Lemuelites, and Ishmaelites. Jacob 1:13, 4th Nephi 38, Mormon 1:8, see also Doctrine and Covenants 3, 17 through 18. Even in the final days of the Nephite demise, Mormon still saw the general population divided along this precise 7-part line. See Mormon chapter 1, verse 8. I see Lehi here acting like Jacob of old. Both Jacob and Lehi pronounced their blessings to all their household, who were gathered around them shortly before they died to organize a household of God in a new land of promise. See 2 Nephi 4:12 and Genesis 49. That's the end of the quote. Curiously, the 7 patrilineal tribes of Lehi established do not correspond exactly to the nation's founding male figures. The Lehite nation had tribes named for Nephi, his wilderness-born younger brothers Jacob and Joseph, his difficult older brothers Laman and Lemuel, and even his erstwhile captive and later friend Zoram. However, there is no tribe named for Nephi's cooperative older brother Sam. Similarly, neither of Ishmael's sons had their own tribe and are instead grouped together under their father's name. The small plates offer a reason for the unevenness of these tribal divisions. They were not made on an abstract principle, but by the will of Lehi. In the house of Israel, as in that of Lehi, the tribes did not map 1-to-1 onto the founding patriarch's sons. Jacob/Israel adopted his grandsons through Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, as his own, making 2 tribes from his favorite son. That's Genesis 48:5. Furthermore, the Levites, entrusted with priestly powers and responsibilities, were not given their own territory. Instead, they were expected to leaven the whole Israel lump by spreading out and performing their sacred functions for all the other tribes. They were thus not a politically and geographically distinct tribe, but a priestly caste within the 12 tribes. One effect of this gerrymandering of the tribal system is that it kept the number of tribes to the culturally meaningful number 12, that is, the product of 2 other numbers sacred to Hebrews, 3 and 4. His footnote for the mentioning about the 3 and the 4. 3 and 4 both appear in the Hebrew Bible as symbols of completeness. 3 corresponds to the 3 known regions of the universe, heaven, earth, water, is the number of primary Hebrew patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. 4 corresponds to the number of the compass points, and thus the corners of the earth, and reflects the number of letters in the sacred name of God, the tetragrammaton. 7 is the most sacred number in the Hebrew Bible, representing perfection. It is sacred because it is the sum of 3 and 4, and because it corresponded to the 7 planets, that's true, that they would have been able to see in the sky, and to the Sabbath as the 7th day. 12 derived its sacred character from the fact that it is the product of 3 and 4 and is the number of the month of the year. Casper Levius, number and numerals. That is a really great rundown and a very short footnote about all those numbers. That was cool. So let's see what he has to say about... Oh, it has to do with the number 7, which is the addition of 7 and 4. Anyways, Lehi's tinkering with the tribal boundaries within his group had a similar effect. By custom of tailoring the boundaries of his family and using apparently arbitrary criteria to determine who got their own tribe and who did not, Lehi created the 7 tribes that included Ishmael's now fatherless children, and Zoram, who had married one of Ishmael's daughters and had proven his loyalty to Nephi. 2 Nephi 1:30. 7, the most sacred number to the Hebrews, was also a combination of the sacred numbers 3 and 4. In this case, not their product, but their sum. The Lehi's nation of 7 tribes was conceptualized as the sum of 4 tribes and 3 tribes, is evident from how these tribes are listed in the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's Revelations. As noted, the tribes are rigidly listed in the order of Nephites, Jacobites, Josephites, Zoramites, Lamanites, Lemuelites, and Ishmaelites. This ordering flouts both age ordering and family in favor of political and religious alliances. The list first groups together the majority of 4 tribes that followed Nephi and comprised the Nephite polity, beginning with Nephi's own eponymous tribe. It then groups together the minority 3 tribes that followed Laman, comprised the Lamanite polity, placing Laman's own tribe at the head of this group, with one exception. The tribal lists are arranged in 2 groupings separated by a break in the text, with the 4 tribes that followed Nephi comprising one group, and the 3 that followed Laman comprising the other. For example, quote, "And it came to pass in this year there began to be a war between the Nephites, who consisted of the Nephites and the Jacobites and the Josephites and the Zoramites, and this war was between the Nephites and the Lamanites, and the Lemuelites and Ishmaelites." See Mormon 1:8, 4 Nephi 1:36-38, and Doctrine and Covenants 3:17-18. Footnote says, the exception to this pattern of listing the 4 Nephite tribes separately from their 3 Lamanite tribes is found in Jacob 1:13, which lists the 7 tribes in the same order but without distinct groupings. Now the people which were not Lamanites were Nephites. Nevertheless, they were called Nephites, Jacobites, Josephites, Zoramites, Lamanites, Lemuelites, and Ishmaelites. So that's the one exception, but it's still in that exact same order. In Hebraic culture and in myriad instances from Genesis to Revelation, the number 7 symbolizes fullness, completeness, or perfection. Lehi grouped his people into 2 distinct sets of tribes, the Nephite set and the Lamanites, each of which might, and frequently did, fancy itself a full Israelite nation, with no need of the other. Their founding patriarch Lehi was wiser than his offspring. He had strategically divided them into a set of 4 tribes and a set of 3 tribes that could only be complete when joined together in their intended fullness as a nation of 7 tribes. So they couldn't be full or complete unless they were together. Yeah? And by dividing them specifically to have 4 tribes under the followers of the Nephites, it continues to show the importance of them following God and such. Next is chapter 10, Nephi's conquest. There is so much in the culture of the patriarchs that I had no clue. I had no clue. No clue. But again, I mean, this keeps showing up and is so important to them, so that when I finally learn the importance of these numbers and their symbols to them, it becomes more important and symbolic to me. God, this is a very important book to me. learning so much. So much. And again, this is not what I like about Don Bradley is because he sets this information in the right order and backs it up with each person's quotes and claims. Like, this isn't just when I look at this now, I'm not sitting here going, yeah, well, that's some speculation. No, I'm thoroughly convinced that that these are particular reasons why these were happening, and especially to Lehi, who was specifically trying to make those 7 tribes. Oh, that's interesting. Does that mean, well, if 3 is for like the heavens, the earth, and water, for the 3, and then the 4 is the completeness of the world. I've also heard of the Melchizedek star is 2 boxes, one on top of each other, so an 8-pointed star. Oh, this is interesting. This is so fascinating. I wonder if it's easy to, like, there's apparently a mathematical trick where you can, using origami, basically make one cut and get a perfect 5-point star. I'm wondering if you can do the same with a 7-pointed star, that you can fold paper or fabric in such a way that with one cut you can make a perfect 7-point star. Sorry, that just came to mind for thinking about the tribes of Lehi and tribes of Israel. Somehow I don't know if a 12-point star would be worthwhile to make. And different flags and symbolism and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, all about, so you had a rant about polygamy in the middle of all this, and also secularism and the birth rate. But hey, we were talking about the tribes and how the tribes need to be set apart to help make them perfect by being together. So, dude, that's a great mic drop at the end. That the only way that they could actually be perfected is if they are listed together. So they make that number 7. And that explains so much why everyone loves the number 7 and 3 and 12 and 4. There's cultural significance behind it. All right, much love. We'll see you later.